It's a Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and we are talking two players coming up on this episode, Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard. Their futures in Memphis almost certainly intertwined with the rise of Vince Williams Jr. and G.G. Jackson, the return of Desmond Bane and John Morant. Does it make sense to keep them both? Arguments for and against the futures in Memphis of Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Monday once again, Memphis Grizzlies fans, NBA fans, fans of Locked On Grizzlies. Hopefully you're an everydayer at this point, hanging out with myself and or Damichael Cole, my wonderful co-host, and it is the dynamic duo with you on this Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Myself, Joe Mullinax. I've covered the Grizzlies for over a decade in various places, most notably Grizzly Bear Blues over on SB Nation back in the day. My co-host is Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, award-winning Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal. You've come to the right place for Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. Thank you so much for being with us. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. Before we get into the show, we got to talk more about Monopoly Go. It is the fast-paced game that lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. Download Monopoly Go now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Thank you so much for being with us wherever you're checking out the show, whether it is on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Make Locked On Grizzlies a part of your everyday NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. Damichael appreciates it. I'm sure I also appreciate it. It is a wonderful opportunity as we grind forth into the second round of the NBA playoffs. We'll talk about that a little bit later on this week, but we want to continue our player reviews. And as we told you, beyond the big three, things would get a little bit weird in terms of the way that we were going to do this, Damichael. And today is absolutely the start of that. I think tomorrow we'll talk about Vince Williams and G.G. Jackson, and we'll combine those two because you could argue their futures are intertwined with the Memphis Grizzlies now as two supposedly core pieces. The two gentlemen that we're talking about today, though, Damichael, maybe not so much part of that long-term core for pretty different reasons, I think. And we'll lead off with Marcus Smart. Now, there's been, I don't want to say weird things because I want to stress, if anybody has sources, it's Damichael, not me. And I'm, 1,000 miles away. So it's just my interpretation of what I see, hear, read when I am consuming Memphis Grizzlies content. And from breakdown day to the times that Smart was either updated on in terms of his injuries, all that sort of stuff, it seems like they value him, the Memphis Grizzlies do. Zach Kleiman, I think, made that pretty clear in comments, both in breakdown day and at other points. But the fit, right? And that is why Kennard, who we'll talk about later, both men, and again, we're going to lead off with Smart, in the games that they played, reinforced that they're still really good at the things that they're supposed to be really good at, right? In the case of Marcus Smart, his defensive numbers were on par with what he's done throughout his career. Maybe not that elite player of the year defensively season, but on par with what you would expect from a guy who is an above average to elite perimeter defender, right? He's still very good at that, can still create off the dribble, can still do some things on both ends of the floor, especially defensively. But when you look at Marcus Smart's fit on the Grizzlies, Damichael, with the rise of G.G. and Vince, with the return of John Bane, Smart, whether it is positionally or maybe even in terms of personality, it just doesn't seem like things are fully clicking the way that maybe they were supposed to. And obviously injuries and other factors might play into that.
Yeah, from the review part of this thing, I would say that, we talked about it the very first day the trade happened on here on Locked On Grizzlies, when, I was talking to people in Boston and me and you were on the show talking about his play style tends to lead. It's the bad part of it. The good is when he's diving for that loose ball that it doesn't look like you're going to come up with it. He just comes, flying on the ground and gets it.
Like you're watching Tony Allen again.
Exactly. And then the bad part of it is, sometimes he'll do that and he'll his core, like he did in the preseason and miss extended time, or he'll end up with a splint in his hand, like we saw in a game, or he'll end up with a dislocated finger and or like we saw, and things like that. So there is some risk to his playing style, and at the end of the day, Taylor Jenkins doesn't want him to change his style. He doesn't want him to slow down. He doesn't want that to change. And as long as that's the case, I think there's going to be some give and take, from an availability standpoint, where you say, well, hopefully we get Marcus 60 of 82 games, or maybe 65 on a good season, because he's going to lay it all on the line. Like, you say you want guys that lay it all on the line. Marcus Smart is definitely going to lay it all on the line. But with all that being said, get into how the season played out. We saw at first, 10, 12 games. I think it was 10 games for him. Like, he got hurt. He didn't play the first 25 without Ja because of, that first injury that he suffered. But, when he got hurt, basically, we saw at the time that the whole point guard, Marcus Smart being the starting point guard thing, wasn't really going, how people thought. I think there was some, thought that at the time, like, okay, yeah, we'll be without Ja Morant, but we could throw Marcus Smart in there and we'll hover around 500 till Ja gets back in. We saw that wasn't the case. In fact, they were well below 500. Lost the first 7-8 games of the season. Now, getting into the value part, you hit it on the button, Joe. I think you hit it on the button. And the thing that stands out to me is, before the season, what did we talk about with Marcus Smart? Think about it. What were the two things we said? Oh, he adds depth to the point guard position, and on top of that, you got another wing, elite level wing defender who can play at a high level.
And can play at a high level next to Ja Morant, which is something that I have been harping on for years, and you have as well, and others have. It's not like I'm some genius. Anybody that comes in here that plays that position has to be able to play next to Ja. If they can't, it's not worth our time any longer.
Yeah, and now look at the situation that we're in. We talked about that at the beginning of the season. If you fast forward to now, you say, oh, the backup point guard position. I think it could be a little tweaks there, but personally, I am okay with the idea of, Ja Morant, and maybe, at this point, we'll see what happens. But I think it's an easy position to address is what I'm getting to, because I think there's depth there with Derrick Rose and Scottie Pippen Jr. I think that is decent depth from the standpoint of that position. On the wing, Vince Williams, without the pedigree, without the accolades, does a lot of the things that you like from Marcus Smart. He's a better rebounder, but he's guarding the top. He had very, very good matchup difficulty when he was healthy this season, guarding Kevin Durant, guarding Luka Doncic. All those guys were praising him, talking about, his competitiveness. He likes it. And more than anything, Vince Williams understands his role. Vince Williams knows, when I'm on the floor with Ja Morant and Desmond Bane, I got to do the dirty work. I'm not about to score 17 points. Like we saw towards the end of the season, he was getting 5 boards, 5 assists every single night, going for that triple-double. He knows when those guys on the floor, it's probably not going to happen. It's possible, but it's probably not going to happen. So with all that being said, if you talk about the way that we viewed Marcus Smart before the season, you go back and listen to it. And in the ways that the Grizzlies needed him, they don't need him in as many of those ways. And we know the idea of value is how much you need something. You don't need him to be that ace-level defender as much. Now, want and need are two different things. Do you want him to? I think so. I am of the opinion that I think the Grizzlies will be a better team with Marcus Smart on it. And I'm still of the opinion that he should still start. Like that's still my whole idea of the situation. But with all that being said, Joe, I do think that from a value standpoint, it's been lessened now with the developmental tracks of a G.G. Jackson and a Vince Williams Jr. We've seen Vince Williams guard all those top guys. There's one game I always go back to. That first game, December 19th against the Pelicans. Ja Morant's first game back. You had the big three in the starting lineup, Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. Who started on the wing that game? Marcus Smart was out. It was Vince Williams. You go to that game, you go to the second quarter, the Grizzlies are down 18, 19 points. They look terrible. And you're like, oh, Ja can't fix this. It was Vince Williams who lit the spark plug. We remember him talking trash to CJ McCollum at the end of the quarter and all that. But Vince Williams kind of led the turnaround, and, Ja finished it off. But basically, in short here, I like the idea of having Marcus Smart on the team. I think he should be on the team. But from a value standpoint, his value has been lessened. by the development of other key pieces, whether it's Scottie Pippen Jr., whether it's Vince Williams, whether it's Gigi Jackson. You've got development in other areas that kind of lessen the need for him.
The leadership of Marcus Smart was valued. His ability to play next to Morant was valued, at least by me. I was always hesitant, and I'm wrong about a lot of things, but I was always hesitant about this idea of him being the starter at the point guard because he hasn't been able to do that in Boston. The best of him in Boston was an off-ball guard, like a DeAnthony Melton type, what he was for Memphis, and that remained true here. I'm with you. The thing that intrigues me is, and we'll talk more about this, it's a long off season. I floated some trade ideas on X. I believe it was this past Friday. The Milwaukee Bucks need to shake things up. And Giannis playing the 5 could make sense for them. If you did a Marcus Smart for Brook Lopez swap, give or take a pick here or there, depending on where you think it has to come from, does that help both teams? A Dame Lillard, Marcus Smart starting backcourt. And then you have Brook Lopez playing the 5 alongside Jaren Jackson Jr. That's something we can visit more down the road. But I think that is intriguing with two teams that obviously have shared lineage, right, with Taylor Jenkins's relationship with Milwaukee in the past. I know Budenholzer's not there anymore. But there's still a mild connection with that front office. How that plays out is going to be interesting to watch. And again, I am of the mind, and I'll share it by the end of the show, we have no idea what this team actually looks like, right? That's one of the – you can talk about the great thing that Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson, all that. We don't know what these dudes look like because of the Morant suspension, all of the injuries. I think you kind of have to run it back, but we'll keep exploring this not just in this episode, but on future episodes of Locked On Grizzlies. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we'll take a dive into the other kind of awkward fit on the roster now, and that's Luke Kennard. We'll talk about that next, coming up on the show. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monopoly Go. We got to pause here and talk more about Monopoly Go. Again, I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You've already talked about that, Joe, but there's just so much good stuff going on in this game. I have to talk about it some more. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments, working together to build each other's boards. The more that you win, the more awesome prizes you unlock. You can get unique stickers, cool new playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings, heist their vaults, and turn on them in the game. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. There's always new timed events that help you win big, massive multipliers for everything you rent frenzies, and unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. Get off the bench, get in the game. Download it now for free on Google Play or on the App Store. Again, Monopoly Go, game on. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by FanDuel. It is winner take all time in the NBA, the NHL. It's playoff season, Damichael, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your very own. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. You heard me right. That's $150 to bet on any spread, money line, player prop, anything your heart desires within FanDuel, you can find it. Again, $150 to bet with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count, whether it's hockey, basketball, or any other sport with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Go check them out today. All right, Damichael, so we talked about the awkwardness with Marcus Smart, and I want to stress, none of that is sourced. None of that is really, we're just kind of observing where the roster is now, right? I want to stress that. Same thing with Luke Kennard, and you and I have already had it out a little bit. We agree most of the time on Locked On Grizzlies, but one of our biggest disagreements since we've been partners on this show is Kennard versus Steven Adams, right? I was in support of keeping Luke Kennard. You thought Steven Adams should have been the choice. And part of the reason you wanted it to be Adams, we've arrived at, right? The fact that it's a team option with Luke Kennard, if Memphis opts in, what do they do with that $14 million expiring salary? The value of Luke Kennard, just like with Smart, his near elite, if we want to call it that now, but still pretty close to elite perimeter defense, comparing that to the still very elite three-point shooting of Luke Kennard. He remains one of the top three-point shooters in the NBA, but I do think it is fair to say, and this is as a Kennard truther here, the gap defensively has grown. I always thought it was a bit overblown. I think you called him a try-hard in the past, and meant as a compliment.
Yeah,
he's going to give effort. I think that mattered less this year because he's losing that step or whatever the case might be. At least to my eye, the numbers are still kind of comparable to the way he's been in the past, but he's still an elite three-point shooter. When you look at Kennard, I think, again, we'll talk more about trades down the road. A Kennard trade brings in less value than a Marcus Smart trade. But the specific skill set that Kennard provides, theoretically speaking, he can still play next to John Morant as a three-point shooter. We talk about Jaren Jackson Jr. not being as efficient in that space. It's hard for me, Damichael, even now, to say let's move on from one of the best three-point shooters in the modern NBA over the last 25 years. But at the same time, there's no denying that, again, if Gigi Jackson, whether it's three-point shooting or just all three levels of his scoring, if it's Vince Williams Jr. as a 3-and-D player, more and more the team is looking like they don't, again, maybe they want him, but do they need Kennard at this stage? It's kind of wild to say, and again, I would say they still need him, but for $14 million on an expiring contract, maybe that and a first-round pick helps you solve a problem elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation because – I'm going to use my same kind of formula that I did with Marcus Smart because you were right. I was more of the opinion that Steven Adams, was a bit valued more, but it was close. Both of those guys I think have big roles. I think Steven Adams as a starting center and being a big part of this team's identity. Like as good as Luke Kennard is, we don't think his playing style culminates to the identity of what the Memphis Grizzlies have become.
And he most certainly should not be a starter, right? Again, if Steven Adams were still here, he would be your starting big. He might only play 20 to 25 minutes, but he's starting at the 5.
And exactly, which brings me to the point of Kennard. Like from a value standpoint, super valuable here. Super valuable. You know why? Because outside of Desmond Bane, is there anybody else with is there anyone else? I'm asking you, Joe. Is there anyone else on the entire roster? They got an open three-point shot. Other than Desmond Bane and Luke Kennard, that you won't be saying, "Oh, I hope this goes in." When those guys are open, that's good. Is there anyone else?
When Luke Kennard and Desmond Bane shoot the basketball, I expect it to go in from 3. When anybody else shoots the ball from 3, I expect it to not go in. That's where we are, and that's the reality of the situation. And one of the reasons I like Kennard,
and that to me is value. He's your guy off the bench. Who, when Desmond Bane goes out, you don't want NBA teams to think, oh, when Desmond Bane goes out of the game, all right, let's drop into this little zone defense. Let's just protect the paint. If they make shots, they make them. No, you want them to say, hey, don't leave that guy. We've seen the gravity impact there, the spacing impact. I think he's still extremely valuable. I don't think the Grizzlies, in no way at this point in time, should be trying to part ways with him from a talent standpoint. Now we got to get to the part that you just kept touching on a little bit, and that's the business side. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is. Like you got to make business decisions here, and $14.7 million for a guy who's going to come off the bench and probably effectively be your third or fourth guard. If Marcus Smart's still on the roster, he's probably your fourth guard because we know Marcus Smart is going to come in and play, that role when Ja comes out of the game and things like that. So basically the point is, that's a lot of money to commit to a guy who you're just depending on to make three-point shots. He's really good at it. You just admit he's one of the best in this millennium at it. He's in every year. He's the top 10 three-point field goal percentage, led the previous 2 seasons before this year, finishing in the top 5. So with all that being said, he is a fit, but I look at it like this, and this is the part I'm going to stand firm on. I think if he comes back to Memphis, the best way for the Grizzlies to handle it would say, hey, let's get that lower salary per year dollar down. $14.7 million this season. Let's get that number down. But in return, we're going to lower that number, but we're going to give you more long-term stability.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, and sorry to interrupt you, partner, the Grizzlies can still opt out of the contract and bring him back.
Yes.
Like that is not the problem. If they opt out, that doesn't mean Kennard won't return. It just could mean exactly what you're saying. Maybe it's a 4-year, $36 million contract as opposed to a 1-year, $14 million.
And if you do that, I'm perfectly fine with it. But this is why, as we've talked about this draft, as we talked about, just the assets that the Grizzlies have. I know we've been zeroed in on the idea of getting this big man, big man, big man, big man. But I keep trying to put it in the back of people's heads. It's not the worst idea in the world if the Grizzlies say, hey, look, we can't figure anything out with Kennard's contract. We're going to just have to play this season out or, try to find a partner if we don't find a partner. Because they're not going to the Grizzlies aren't going to take pennies back from you. So I'm sure there's a scenario where they're saying, fine, we'll play this season out with them, see how far this team goes, and see you next season, Kennard. We'll see you on the other side. With that being said, I do see a scenario where that draft pick or, someone like Tarek Baberovich that we've been talking about for Fenerbahce, someone like that comes over to Memphis and becomes that de facto Kennard replacement as that shooter off the bench. Because right now there isn't a replacement in the organization. Like if Marcus Smart were to be moved or something like that, we know exactly who would step into the start lineup in that case scenario. There's no one to replace or even get close to replacing what Luke Kennard brings.
And that is a major difference. But as we've kind of been hinting out throughout the show, why not both, right? Insert that meme here, that GIF, whatever you want to call it. Why not just run it back, so to speak? There's ways that Memphis can address their weaknesses while keeping both men, whether it's re-signing Kennard, keeping him on that team option, whatever the case might be. We will talk about next here on Locked On Grizzlies exactly that. I don't want to speak for Damichael. I'll let him obviously answer himself. But at least for me, spoiler alert, I'm fine with keeping them both. We'll talk about why coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by DoorDash. Again, Mother's Day is coming up. Make sure you are looking out for your number one, your mom. Make her smile with Mother's Day flowers. Surprise her with gifts from brands she loves. Delivered the very same day with the good folks at DoorDash. Does she have a sweet tooth? Is she a tech enthusiast? Maybe she loves beauty products, or she's very outdoorsy. No matter what she's into, you can make her smile with a fruit or flower bouquet, makeup, tech gear, workout gear, and so much more. Get thoughtful gifts that she deserves with the convenience that you need. You can choose same-day delivery or schedule a week ahead for when flowers and gifts should arrive to her door with DoorDash. Get a Mother's Day gift as unique as she is with DoorDash. Use code LOCKEDONNBA. Get 50% off your next order up to $15 if you spend $15 or more on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order. Now on DoorDash. That is Locked On NBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out with an argument for running it back, kind of. Stick with us here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host and partner, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer, award-winning Memphis Grizzlies beat writer, and it's well-deserved. If you're not already following all the amazing work that Damichael does over at the Commercial Appeal, make sure you're doing so via X at Damichael C. If you want to yell at me for trying to trade Marcus Smart on a random weekday, you can follow me on X at Joe Mullinax. And I want to stress to Michael, we've been having this conversation calmly, right? Nobody's yelling, nobody's freaking out. That's what you get on the Locked On Podcast Network. Folks talking through issues, things that we're interested in. It's not like Fox Sports or ESPN where there's a bunch of screaming talking heads. It's not just Locked On Grizzlies. If you don't believe us, check out Locked On Sports Today. That is the first ever 24/7 streaming YouTube channel. You can check out our show at times. Obviously, the playoffs are running rampant. NHL, NBA, you can check out those kinds of programs. Turn off ESPN, turn off Fox Sports. You can get everything you need in terms of analysis and calm conversation about sports over at Locked On Sports Today. Again, it's on YouTube, first ever 24/7 streaming app or channel app on YouTube. You can also check us out at Amazon Fire TV under the free channels app. Again, that's Locked On Sports Today. You can check that out each and every day, especially on YouTube, but also on Amazon Fire TV. Why not both? I'm looking at Tankathon, which is our go-to, or at least it's my go-to. I keep feeling like I'm speaking for you, partner. Tell me to shut up at any time. And I'm looking at lottery odds, all right? Yeah. The Memphis Grizzlies, there's two picks in the top 10 that they're certainly not going to have. That's 5 or 6, just the way the NBA does the lottery, right? They will not pick 5th. They will not pick 6th. They have between 1.3% chance for the 10th pick, very low, 34.1%. That's the most likely selection, number 8 in the draft. The Grizzlies are going to have a top 10 pick almost certainly. There's a very minuscule chance that they pick at 11, but a lot would have to go wrong for Memphis, and that's very unlikely probability-wise. Why do I keep saying this? Because whether it's in the top 10 of the lottery, whether it's part of a trade, if we all agree that the biggest issue, and we've heard Zach Kleiman say it himself, is a big, right? They have to address the big position somehow. We've talked about Donovan Clingan ad nauseum, right? We've talked about Alexander Sarr on here before, kind of like a bizarro international Jaren Jackson Jr., but he's bigger than
Parker. Our guy Parker wrote some good stuff on
Parker did write about him. Shout out to Parker Fleming. Some other guys that are possibilities in the first round. Kyle Filipowski from Duke, who would check that three-point shooting box. He's kind of like Kelly Olynyk. Might be a good comp for him. Yves Missy, I'm sure I mispronounced that. The Baylor center. Yes, Missy from Baylor. Again, 8.8 rebounds a game. He's got some talent. Ware from Indiana, a true 7-foot big. And obviously we've talked about Zach Edey before. He's currently mocked at 30 to the Celtics. Can you imagine the Celtics having Porzingis and Edey on the floor together? One's 7'3", one's 7'4". You're not going to ever score in the paint. So my point is, obviously, if they like Clingan, that is the best center outside of Sarr. They view Sarr on Tankathon as a combo big. Clingan is a very true, legitimate center. Yeah. Whether it's in the top 5 of the draft or the bottom 5 of the first round, there are ways to address this without moving on from Smart at all, or without moving on from Kennard at all. And that's kind of where I'm at, partner. You have the ability roster-wise to run this thing back, to bring in a cheaper-ish Steven Adams type, and you see what it looks like, hopefully, with everybody at full strength, the way that it was supposed to be, minus Steven Adams. And you've added a G.G. Jackson and Vince Williams Jr. for the purpose of depth. Because if this past season taught us anything, Damichael, it's that you need these bodies, right? You can't just say Marcus Smart's going to play 82 games for all the reasons you mentioned earlier. You can't just say that Luke Kennard is going to be able to stay on the court for 20 minutes a game because of the problems I see. And again, I'm a Luke Kennard guy. The three-point shooting is still there, but I think it's fair to start wondering if the defense is going to start regressing, if it hasn't already done so. So you keep them both for the purpose of depth and the fact that they're still very good. You still need guys that you can count on in the playoffs, because we haven't seen it from Vince Williams Jr. or G.G. Jackson yet. It's hard to count on that, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But you have a tool, thanks to this gap year, that whether you trade back, whether you trade up, they can do a variety of different things through the draft, and obviously they can use free agency as well, but the draft is the easiest path to solving this one gaping hole that the Grizzlies have to fill. Yeah,
and I'm going to come at a different angle for this, because the draft is the easiest route to solve it, but I think that'll only be confirmed after the draft lottery. Draft positioning,
and that is important.
This year, draft positioning will be as important as, I mean, I don't want to over-exaggerate it, but the bigs, there's a big gap between the two guys that you mentioned at the top, Alexander and Clingan. There is a gap between those guys and any other big that's even potential to be in the lottery, let alone top 10 picks.
I think the next big they have going after that, and I'm not counting Ron Holland.
No, he's a wing.
The next big is Filipowski at 16.
Yeah,
so they've got Sarr at
not
2.
Even in the lottery.
This is Tankathon. Sarr at 2, Clingan at 4, which I'm not sure why Portland would take Clingan, but Sarr at 2, Portland at 4, and then the next true center is Filipowski at 16. So there's 2 lottery type bigs in this draft.
And you mentioned it as well. We're just going by the numbers here. I wrote about this as well. The draft, the lottery numbers. The most likely landing spot by the numbers is 8.
Yes.
Now, if you go on the history, as I said in the story, for the last 5 years, the team picking at 7 has moved up. And if they move up, you don't move up to 5 or 6, as Joe said earlier. You jump to the top 4. The Grizzlies, if they move up, they'll be in the top 4, which will put them in prime position to get Donovan Clingan. So after Sunday, on May 12th, draft lottery gets here, we will know pretty much if the draft is the easiest solution. But when it comes to keeping both, getting back to Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard, here's my thing. Yes, I think a lot of us would say you'd like to keep both, but I think you have to say there are 2 things have to be said with this. Like if you say, hey, I want to keep both, you have to say I'm fine with the Grizzlies getting a player in free agency for the minimum or a piece of the mid-level exception to play the center role. If you're fine with that, then you get to keep both. If you want a center who's going to be upwards of $10-12 million a year, you're probably not going to be able to keep both. Keep in mind, they didn't get rid of Steven Adams because of injuries, so to speak, just that reason alone. If you've been keeping up in Houston, he's progressing really, really well. Part of the reason was there's a financial commitment that had to be made to Steven Adams. And, there was a decision that needed to be made, as we talked about at the top of the show. Guys like Kennard and Steven Adams had to choose between those type of players. So with all that being said, here's my point. I'm fine with the idea of keeping both. I think it makes sense to keep both. You just got to say, okay, center spot, I'm fine with if Andre Drummond wants the minimum, or, who knows who will be available at the minimum. JaVale McGee, those type of guys, or whatever the case may be. I'm fine with that at the center spot alongside of Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark, and Santi Aldama. If you're okay with that, it works out perfectly.
And it's important to point out, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, the Orlando Magic, the newly eliminated Orlando Magic. Yep. You, Damichael, have talked about their three centers numerous times.
Mm-hmm.
Goga, maybe you throw a future protected first and salary filler at the Magic, and that's how you address the problem. I think there's ways, the Knicks are going to have to make a decision. We talked about Hartenstein before.
Yeah.
They're probably not going to trade. Probably not going to trade that guy because he's looked so good in the playoffs, but they have Mitch Rob there as well. Are you going to spend that much money across two legitimate solely bigs, right? Like Robinson is not a three-point threat. That's not what he is. He's a great defender and rebounder.
And they like Jericho Sims too, but we could save that conversation for later. Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of like the Magic.
The Grizzlies, because of their draft picks, they don't owe anybody anything, right? They can literally do anything with their draft picks moving forward, and that's another way they can address it. The money gets tight. They have to figure out what's going on with the Zaire Williams, the John Conchar, Asante Aldama in terms of extensions coming up, that sort of thing. But there is room for wiggling, and they are going to be able to execute whatever their vision is. So, again, it sounds like you're cool with both as long as folks are understanding that, there's flaws to both Smart and Kennard, and it also limits them in terms of how they acquire a big. It's either the minimum in free agency, because they're still in that luxury tax conversation if they keep both, obviously, plus a lottery pick. That's a higher draft number than a lot of these draft picks usually get.
If they get in the top four, if they end up in the top four, then this whole last 2-3 minutes is moot. Like, get Donovan Clingan, and that's that. But
correct.
If they're 8th or 9th in what we will eventually call no man's land, because you can't you're gonna have to trade up, trade down, whatever the case.
You don't reach for Filipowski at 8 or 9. Like that's not something you do.
No way.
You either trade back, or you move on from a Luke Kennard and you draft a Dalton Connect, and you say that guy is going to be your Kennard replacement. And then you have to find a big some other way. There's lots of stuff. Again, the lottery, I believe, is Sunday coming up.
Sunday.
That's gigantic for Memphis and every team that's in the lottery. It'll be fascinating to watch play out. And Damichael and I, of course, will have you ready for that here on Locked On Grizzlies. On our Tuesday show, partner, again, we'll do a similar structure. We'll talk about G.G. Jackson and Vince Williams Jr.'s seasons, the two guys that made this not necessarily a lost season because of their rise, how that impacts a team that is trying to compete for a championship, because there's folks on social media that keep saying, well, why are we've been wanting a wing all this time, a big scoring wing, and we have one. Why aren't we just starting G.G. Jackson? Well, because you're supposed to be a championship team, and he's going to turn 20
They're about
years
to wake
old.
up the monster.
That is why you're not just going to start G.G. Jackson. So I think that the balancing act of these two guys who clearly have value for Memphis, I'm not saying that at all, but again, are you trying to win a championship or not? There's no evidence to suggest that these two guys actually contribute to playoff basketball because they haven't had that opportunity.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about these two guys. I actually had a conversation with a recent former Grizzlies player about these two players, and we can talk about that as well. He
I like that.
He had some really good thoughts on one of those players in particular.
Interesting. Okay. I like that's a good preview for tomorrow's show. So make sure you're checking out Locked On Grizzlies on Tuesday. We'll be talking Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams Jr. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode, wherever you get podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Damichael appreciates it, as do I. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, wherever you get it, either on YouTube or on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. Thank you again. Make us everyday listens, right? Make us an everyday listen, an everyday download. Every time an episode drops of Locked On Grizzlies, hang out with Damichael and or myself. We will appreciate it. I always think the show is best when we're together, and that will be the case again on Tuesday. So for Damichael, I am Joe. Shout out to Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard. The money's about to get tight, but I want to see what this team looks like fully healthy. I want to see the vision, and hopefully we get that chance. Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams Jr. might have something to say about that in a different way. We'll talk about that tomorrow. For Damichael, I'm Joe. Stay locked in. Again, wherever you get podcasts, we are free and available as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Catch you next time.